Hi, everyone. I'm interviewing Ann Wallace. In case you are unfamiliar, Ann Wallace is an English professor at NJCU. She is a published writer and poet, and she's also a longtime survivor of ovarian cancer and lives with multiple sclerosis as well. In March of this year, Ann was one of the first Jersey City residents to be diagnosed with COVID. She found herself using her poetry and essays to both communicate the experience of her illness and also to help inform the public at large. So I'm going to share the screen because we're going to look at, well, Ann will read one of her poems and we'll look a little bit at some of the essays that she wrote. And we are just going to kind of explore her whole process and the different modes of communication that she's using, both within poetry and with the essay form. So I'm going to, here we go. Just share this part of the screen so we can see. Okay, everybody see that? This is kind of like the intro, and then here is the poem, if you could.
Yes, I will read this. This is a poem I wrote in mid-May, and it's called Viral Rooting, and the poetic form is called a shadorma, which was a new form for me. I learned it while I was sick, and it seemed fitting for what I was going through. Viral rooting. The news keeps breaking, the symptoms unfurling down my palm-sized screen, this insomnia-inducing bedtime reading list. It blurs my vision, head spinning, heart beating fast. I feel the pressure build, look to check my sats. It's an old habit now, 8 weeks in. Yet still, fresh terror as this viral knowledge takes root inside of me.
Okay, so this is very, very pure kind of emotion of the experience that you're having in that moment. And I think that, you know, it's worth noting that while you were very ill and had very little energy, you even partook in this writing a poem a day.
Yeah.
Can you explain about the poem a day thing? And I think this maybe came out of that exercise.
Yeah. So I write poetry. I'm a poet, and I became sick in mid-March. And April, the month of April, is National Poetry Month. So every April, I write a poem a day. That's my challenge. It's like a national challenge, but I do it. It's a really great exercise for me as a poet. And so this April, I was 2 weeks into my COVID illness, and I was really, really sick. But I thought, you know, COVID be damned, I'm going to do this. And I wrote, and I'd already been writing a few poems about COVID by that point, but I thought I'm going to try the challenge. You know, if I can't do it, I can't do it, but why not try? And so I did. And this one was actually written in May, 8 weeks in, as it says, it's old habit, 8 weeks in. So the challenge was over, but I still kept writing even after it finished. And the reason why, it wasn't just COVID be damned, right? It was that, but it was also that it seemed a really valuable thing to write through. I was going through something, as Jane, you said, I was one of the first people to be sick in Jersey City. We were in crisis mode here and in, you know, in the metropolitan area, in Boston area. You know, we had hotspots in this nation. There wasn't a lot of information about COVID. And I just thought, you know, I'm going to record this. I need to record this. I need an outlet for it. And I need to, writing poetry is a way to sort of process what I was experiencing. I needed to articulate it. And I'll say one more thing, and then I'll perhaps stop and let you jump in, Jane. But the other piece of it is that when you have COVID, one of the symptoms is, for people who are quite sick, is brain fog. Thinking is really hard. Finding words is really hard. It is a struggle. It's like running up a hill to put words on the paper and or to just to articulate something. So that was another thing for me. It was a way to keep my brain sharp. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It was a way to keep my brain sharp and to keep me, to just keep that mental process going.
Right. And speaking of that, you had this struggle early on with just getting your daughter tested and in turn getting yourself tested. That kind of, can we go back to the share? Yeah. So that brings us to the first essay that you wrote that was published on the HuffPost and pretty much went viral. Regarding the testing, which was so difficult in the beginning. Like everything, as you say, was so disorganized and people were in crisis mode. And I want to sort of, I want you to talk about this, but I want to sort of emphasize as well that your poetry had sort of a different, almost like a different impact, both for you writing it and on the reader than an essay did, which I feel is a little bit more like was a strategic thing that you did in order to communicate. I noticed you did this all over social media. This was always on your Facebook pages. You made these posts public so that people could read and share them. This is a very interesting way to process such a serious illness, also an illness that was a big unknown at that moment. So talk to us a little bit about this first essay that you wrote, please.
So I wrote this when this was published March 15th, and I wrote it the day before, right? Because it took a day to publish. And I wrote it because my daughter was sick, as you see in the title. My teen daughter is sick, but can't get the coronavirus test. That's simply not okay. That's the title. She couldn't get tested. There were no positive cases in Jersey City until March 13th, that Friday. Finally, not finally, that sounds horrible. I say finally because I know there were people sick, including Molly. And until there was an official case of it, people weren't taking it seriously enough. Schools were still open when she got sick. She first started feeling sick on Monday the 10th, I think, or Sunday the 8th, I should say. And people weren't taking it seriously. Also, people didn't think kids could get sick. And I didn't know she had, actually, I was away when she first got sick. But when I came home and saw her on that Wednesday and I heard her cough, I thought, I'm calling the doctor. This is not right. Because it's a very distinctive COVID cough. And she had a fever and she was so sluggish, she could barely walk, etc. So this felt like I needed to write this. She was supposed to take the SATs that Saturday, and they hadn't canceled the SATs here yet. Because they didn't think this was it hadn't hit here yet. And I needed to make the point that it had hit here, and we need to start sitting up and taking notice. So that's why I wrote this piece.
And this piece also, well, and then that led to this one, which was a couple of months later. And this really went international. This was shared in multiple news outlets. This screen grab is from,
Good Morning America.
Good Morning America, right. So, so this is really interesting because now you're getting deeper into it and you're still sharing what is, your ongoing experience with this. Again, letting people know. Now, by this time, 3 months in it, we had a lot of misinformation, people pushing back, not taking it seriously. Oh, and also this message of like, oh, it's like a flu, you get over it quickly, et cetera, et cetera. I would imagine that made you incensed. And
yes.
and there was that fuel, that anger behind all of that to propel you into, again, communicating your experience to a wider audience. So tell us a little bit about this one then.
So just to read the title for anybody who can't see the screen, I've been sick with COVID-19 for over 3 months. Here's what you should know. This was actually published on 100 days for me of being sick. And, that subtitle, here's what you should know. You are absolutely right, Jayne. I was incensed. I was, let me also paint the picture for you of what my life was like. This is June 24th. I knew I was no longer infectious. But you can see here in this picture of me that I am wearing oxygen. I am on my couch, unable to do much. And I would actually left my house by that point, going for short walks, but that did not mean that I wasn't still very, very sick. I mean, I'm still sick. I'm still struggling every day, and I don't use my oxygen anymore. I have it in case I need it, but I'm getting better, but it's a slow, slow process. Anyway, so back to why I wrote this. I wrote it because I'm part of a lot of different long hauler groups now on social media. And I read the news incessantly now because I am sick and I have a lot of reading time. And I've been doing I follow the research, the scientific research on COVID. I follow the news on it. And I kept reading all these myths and these misconceptions of it is just the flu. Oh, it's either it's the flu and you're better in 2 weeks, or you die. You're on a ventilator, and if you're on a ventilator, you die. Well, first of all, if you're on a ventilator, you don't necessarily die. And there's a whole range of an experience between those two extremes. And so I really wanted to get that out there because I'm one of those people. I'm a long hauler. I did not get better in 3 weeks. I did not get better in 4 weeks. I am 6.5 months in now, and I still struggle to make it through my days. So that was one of the misconceptions. And also there were a lot of people whose family members, their spouses, their doctors did not believe that they were still sick, their employers. And so this story about the long haulers had not yet broken yet. I still think it hasn't broken quite enough, but there is increasing coverage. The New York Times just did a piece on it, on some long haul patients last week or so. So when I wrote this, I got a call from Good Morning America that day. I got a call from Fox Radio. I was on Fox Radio National. They did an 11-minute interview with me on national radio that went, well, it's actually international, which I thought was astonishing. And it was a very, you think that they wouldn't be receptive to this story, but they were very compassionate. The interviewer was, and it was a really good interview, frankly. And I got other coverage from it. And as Jayne said, this did go international. So I just was trying to get this story out. And I knew also that as a writer, I had this ability to do it that a lot of people didn't have. There are a lot of people sick who don't write. And it's hard to tell your story if you're not a writer. It's also hard to, there's so many components of it. This was a hard piece for me to write because I didn't have much stamina. And if you look at the time frame, 100 days basically between these two pieces I wrote, actually 102, the HuffPost piece was posted and I got sick a couple days later. 102 days. In that time I was writing, in those 102 days I was writing, and I wrote and pitched a piece for HuffPost, but it wasn't quite right for them. But I started so many other essays and I posted on social media all the time, but my stamina was such that writing this piece took a lot out of me. And I didn't write a piece when I was 8 weeks in that was of this nature because I could have written something along these lines at that point, but I didn't have it in me at that point. I wasn't well enough to write a sustained piece. I don't know how many words it's in. I should have checked, but it's a long piece. And so that was a sort of stamina I didn't have. But what I was doing, to go back to your point about social media, is about once a week, sometimes a little more often, every 5 days or so, I did make a long Facebook post and always made it public. After people started asking me to do so, I started making them public because it was very clear that people were craving and needed and wanted this information. So I shared my story, as uncomfortable as that sometimes was. And like this photo, not terribly flattering. It's been around the world, but I think that the public service of it was more important than whether it's a flattering photo, which I did edit a little bit, but just to give it a little more color, but
you don't look as
vanity.
Well, listen, I actually like this photo, and I feel like it does convey a certain sense of like resignation and fatigue. You can see that you're tired and that. So it's interesting on that level of like getting the word out there. It's funny that you mentioned Fox Television because unfortunately and this is part of the COVID story, the pandemic and our reactions to it did get very polarized in a political way. And we're not going to delve into that per se, but you went on Fox Television. Nobody needed to know your political agenda or viewpoint or anything, but I know that you were very conscious of speaking in a generalized manner so that you wouldn't alienate anybody and that you would feel like my experience, though deeply personal, is also universal. And so anybody listening would be able to latch on to that in some way, shape, or form.
I had to, it was one of the things, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It took a lot out of me to prepare for that Fox interview because I thought I have one shot to reach an audience that I probably will never have at listening to me again. And this is a moment that I think it matters. And I did think very carefully about how I would articulate my experience. There is no, would be no point in trying to shame people or trying to be angry and express that. I might feel all of that. And some of that I can express in my poetry because that's and a lot of my poetry is more political. A lot of it is very, very personal and very intimate, but then sometimes I write poems that are political and or have that component to them. I was careful with the HuffPost pieces, but also that Fox interview to try to reach a wide audience. That the purpose of it was to try to show people that this was real, and it does not matter your political affiliation. It's real. It can affect anyone. We know that now. Our president has it. And as do many people in his circle and our former governor, Chris Christie. And, it's upsetting. It's sad that it takes this to happen for people to take it seriously. But I think right now we are in a moment that might really open a lot of people's eyes to the fact of this really and truly being a devastating disease with long lasting consequences. Okay. I think we're almost out of time.
All right, we're almost out of time, but I also want to remind the viewers that your expression through poetry is quite eloquent and beautiful. I want to hold up your book here for a second, your most recent book of poems, which focus a lot on your experience with cancer, with recovery, with the ongoing issues with MS. And I know that you've been writing some just really amazing work out of this particular experience, just very different than your essays. Your essays are like factual and straightforward and communicative in a different way than your voice as a poet. So why don't we just kind of end up just wrapping up the poetry side of it? And
we have to wrap up our whole session.
Wrap up our session with you just talking about let's bring it back to the poetry side of it. And so, where can we look forward to reading your poems on this particular topic?
So I have a website, annwallacephd.com. I will put that in the chat as we end. Have no doubt, I will be working on a collection of this work I've been writing, a poetry collection, but then I'm planning to do some kind of memoir as well, memoir collection or a book length piece there. So I will share all of that. You can follow me on Twitter and on my website, and I will put that in the chat for people. So,
and many of your poems have been published too.
Yes, and those are all on my website. Yep.
Great.
annwallacephd.com. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that's great. Are we out of time?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jayne, for moderating that. And thank you so much for sharing your story today, but also over the last several months. I think it's really important for all of us to understand what you've been through. So we really appreciate it. And,